Dr. Olivia Carter boarded Flight 1627 with a first-class ticket in hand, expecting nothing more than a smooth trip. But from the moment she stepped into the cabin, all eyes were on her. Doubt, discomfort, whispers that she didn't belong. And then the ultimate humiliation. A man in her seat. A flight attendant siding against her. Security stepping in. They tried to remove her, but what happened next changed everything. Because when a life-or-death emergency struck mid-flight, the same people who had doubted her suddenly needed her. What happened on that plane sparked a global conversation, exposed deep biases, and put Olivia in a position of power no one saw coming. How did she turn humiliation into victory? And what shocking offer did she receive after the flight? Stay tuned, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe now for more powerful real-life stories that challenge the way we see the world. Dr. Olivia Carter adjusted the strap of her leather bag as she stepped into the first-class cabin. She had taken countless flights, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the hushed voices. Maybe it was the way the other passengers glanced at her, then quickly looked away. She found her seat 3A, a window spot with extra legroom. But before she could sit, she noticed a man already there. He was in his early 50s, dressed in a navy suit, silver cufflinks gleaming under the cabin lights. He leaned back, sipping champagne as if he owned the space. "Excuse me," Olivia said, keeping her tone even. "I believe you're in my seat." The man barely glanced at her before taking another sip. "You sure you're in the right place?" Olivia pulled out her first-class boarding pass and held it up. "Yes, this is my seat." The man chuckled. "Oh, I get it. Must have been a free upgrade. They've been handing those out lately." Something in his voice made Olivia's stomach tighten. A ripple of quiet laughter spread through the cabin. She scanned the faces around her. Some looked amused, others uncomfortable. Before Olivia could respond, a flight attendant appeared. She was a petite blonde woman in a crisp uniform, her name tag reading Lauren. But instead of addressing the man in her seat, Lauren turned to Olivia. "Ma'am, let me check your ticket," she said with a tight smile. Olivia's jaw clenched. "I just showed him my ticket. He's the one sitting in the wrong seat." Lauren didn't even look at the man. Instead, she sighed as if Olivia were causing a scene. "Ma'am, just let me verify. I'm a platinum member," Olivia interrupted, pulling out her frequent flyer card. "I've flown first class more times than I can count." A heavy silence fell over the cabin. The passengers were no longer just watching, they were waiting. Would she be removed? Would she back down? The man in her seat smirked. "You don't have to make this difficult, sweetheart." Olivia's fingers curled around her bag strap. She could feel the weight of every gaze, every assumption. Before she could respond, a voice from across the aisle muttered, "I don't feel comfortable with this." Olivia turned her head sharply. A middle-aged woman clutched her designer purse, as if Olivia were a threat. Another passenger chimed in. "This is supposed to be a premium experience." Lauren hesitated, but then nodded. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to move, for the comfort of our passengers." A cold wave of disbelief washed over Olivia. "I paid for this seat," she said slowly. "Are you saying my presence is making people uncomfortable?" Lauren's smile didn't waver. "It's just that first-class passengers expect a certain atmosphere." Before Olivia could say another word, two security officers appeared. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice low but firm. "We don't want trouble." Olivia's heart pounded. Trouble? She had done nothing wrong. And then a scream from the back of the plane shattered everything. "Help! My baby, he's not breathing." The entire plane erupted into chaos. The air in the cabin turned electric. A woman's desperate cries from economy class sliced through the tension like a blade. "Please, somebody helps. He's turning blue." For a second, no one moved. The flight attendants stood frozen, their polished professionalism cracking under real panic. The security officers, who had been moments away from removing Olivia, hesitated. Olivia didn't. She grabbed her bag and moved. Years of medical training kicked in before she even processed what was happening. Every second mattered. A child not breathing? There was no time for hesitation. But just as she stepped into the aisle, a wall of resistance slammed into her. The man who had taken her seat, the same man who had smirked and called her sweetheart, stood up and blocked her path. "This is first class," he said coldly. "Stay in your place." Olivia's pulse roared in her ears. She barely registered the collective gasp from the surrounding passengers. "Move," she ordered. He didn't. "Let someone else handle it. I'm sure they have, She didn't let him finish. Olivia shoved past him with force, her shoulder colliding with his, as she barreled toward the cries. The cabin crew snapped into motion, startled by her determination. "She's a doctor," someone shouted. "Not a flight attendant. Not security. A passenger." Lauren's eyes widened. "You're a..." But Olivia wasn't listening. She sprinted down the aisle, the plush carpet muffling her steps as she reached the back of the plane. The mother was cradling a small, limp child. A boy maybe 2 years old, his tiny chest barely moving. His lips were tinged with blue. His mother's hands were shaking so badly she could hardly hold him upright. "Please," the mother begged, tears streaking down her face. "Help him." Olivia dropped to her knees in the narrow aisle, yanking open her medical bag. "I'm a doctor," she said quickly. "What happened?" He was fine, and then he just stopped breathing." Olivia's hands moved instinctively, her mind racing through the possibilities. Airway obstruction? Allergic reaction? A sudden respiratory failure? She tilted the child's head back, checking for an obstruction. Nothing. His breathing was shallow, erratic. No time to think. Just act. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Weak pulse. Not good. She needed oxygen. Now. "Where's the emergency medical kit?" she demanded. A flight attendant snapped into action, yanking a bright red bag from an overhead compartment. Olivia grabbed the oxygen mask and fit it over the boy's face. "Come on, baby," she murmured, adjusting the flow. "Breathe for me." The cabin held its breath. The mother's sobs were the only sound. 5 seconds. 10. Then a tiny gasp. The boy's chest rose. The mother let out a ragged cry, clutching her son's hand as his eyelids fluttered open. Relief flooded through Olivia's veins, but she didn't let go. She monitored him closely, adjusting the oxygen until his breathing stabilized. "He's okay," she finally said, voice firm. "But we need to land as soon as possible." The cabin erupted. Passengers cheered. Some clapped. Others just stared at Olivia in stunned silence. A deep, sharp voice cut through the noise. "She saved him?" Olivia looked up straight into the eyes of the businessman who had blocked her. The realization dawned on him like a slap to the face. She wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't an upgrade. She was the only person on this plane who could have saved that child. For the first time since she boarded, Olivia saw something new in his expression. Shame. But the moment wasn't over. A second later, the flight attendant with the name tag Lauren pressed a hand to her earpiece. Her face went pale. She turned to Olivia, voice trembling. "There's another emergency. In first class." Olivia's pulse hadn't even slowed when the next wave of chaos hit. "A medical emergency in first class," the flight attendant repeated, her voice shaking. A heavy realization settled over the plane. First class. The same cabin where she had just been denied her seat. The same passengers who had mocked her, dismissed her, and tried to remove her. Now they needed her. Olivia took one last glance at the little boy in his mother's arms. His breathing had stabilized. The oxygen mask was still fitted to his face, his small fingers curled tightly around his mother's sleeve. He would be okay. She stood up, squared her shoulders, and moved. The first-class cabin was eerily silent. a stark contrast to the chaos in economy. Passengers who had been sneering at her minutes ago now sat stiff and alert, their expressions tight with unease. Near the front of the cabin, an elderly man in a tailored gray suit lay slumped in his seat. His wife knelt beside him, gripping his hand in both of hers, her knuckles white. "Richard," she whimpered, "stay with me." A flight attendant hovered nearby, uselessly wringing her hands. The security officers, who had tried to remove Olivia, stood frozen. Olivia pushed past them all. She knelt beside the man and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. No pulse. Adrenaline surged through her veins. "He's in cardiac arrest," she snapped. "I need the defibrillator now." The flight attendant Lauren jolted to life, spinning toward an overhead compartment. The defibrillator appeared in her trembling hands, but she hesitated. She looked at Olivia and didn't hand it over. For one excruciating second, the world seemed to slow. You're sure?" Lauren stammered. Olivia's blood ran cold. She knew exactly what was happening. Even now, even in an emergency, they doubted her. They didn't trust a black woman to be the most qualified person in the room. Rage burned in her chest, but she shoved it down. She had no time for this. "If you don't give me that defibrillator right now," she said, voice like steel, "this man will die, and it will be on you." Lauren's face drained of color. She thrust the device into Olivia's hands. Olivia worked fast. She ripped open Richard's dress shirt, exposing his pale chest. She attached the electrode pads and powered on the defibrillator. A robotic voice cut through the tension, analyzing. "Heart, rhythm, shock advised." She didn't hesitate. "Clear." A single jolt surged through his body. His chest jerked. Passengers gasped. The wife sobbed into her hands. No response. Again, Olivia ordered. Another jolt. Nothing. The businessman from earlier, the one who had blocked her path, was standing now. His hands clenched into fists. He looked terrified. Olivia gritted her teeth. She would not let this man die. She placed her hands over his heart and started CPR. 30 compressions. 2 rescue breaths. Repeat. Seconds blurred together. Sweat dripped down Olivia's back. Then a sharp inhale. Richard gasped. His body jerked. His eyelids fluttered. His wife cried out in relief. The passengers collectively exhaled. He was alive. A stunned silence followed. Then applause. It started with a single clap. Then another. Then the entire first-class cabin erupted. But Olivia wasn't smiling. She rose to her feet, meeting the eyes of every passenger who had doubted her. The businessman who had mocked her? His face was ashen. The flight attendant who had tried to remove her? Tears pooled in her eyes. The weight of their assumptions hung in the air like a guilty verdict. Richard's wife clutched Olivia's hands, her voice trembling. You saved him. Thank you." But Olivia's gaze was locked on the businessman, the same one who had stood in her way. His lips parted like he wanted to say something. An apology? An excuse? A pathetic attempt to explain away his behavior? But Olivia didn't care. She grabbed her bag and turned away, because she had never needed their validation. The applause faded, replaced by an uncomfortable hush. Dr. Olivia Carter stood in the aisle of first class, her breathing steady despite the exhaustion settling into her bones. She had just saved 2 lives on this flight, one in economy, one in first class. 2 very different reactions. In economy, a mother had held her hands, crying in gratitude. Here, in first class, the air was thick with guilt. No one looked directly at her. They sat stiff in their seats, staring at their hands, their watches, their glasses of untouched champagne. Except for him, the businessman who had blocked her, the man who had stood in her way when a child was dying. His mouth opened. No words came out. For the first time since she boarded, he looked small. Good. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of pretending his actions were forgettable. He had tried to keep her in her place. That place had just happened to be exactly where she was needed. A flight attendant cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "Dr. Carter, would you like to return to your seat?" Olivia turned to her, her dark eyes sharp. "Oh, so now I'm allowed to sit here?" The flight attendant winced. The businessman flinched. The security officers who had been ready to remove her stared at their polished shoes. No one had an answer. Olivia didn't need one. She walked past them all, returning to 3A, the seat she had fought for. The seat that had somehow become more than a seat. It was a symbol. She sank into the plush leather, ignoring the nervous glances from the passengers around her. She wasn't here for them. She never had been. A deep exhale left her lips. For the first time since the plane had taken off, she closed her eyes. Minutes passed. Then a whisper. "I didn't know." Olivia's eyes snapped open. The businessman, Mr. Charles Whitmore. His name had been announced when he ordered his pre-flight scotch. CEO of a major hospital chain. A man with influence, wealth, and biases he never questioned. "Until now, I didn't know you were a doctor," he continued. His voice was strained, as if the words hurt. Olivia stared at him, unimpressed. "And that would have made a difference?" Whitmore swallowed. He had no answer. "That little boy," Olivia said slowly, "was almost another name on a death certificate because of you." His face drained of color. She let the silence drag. Let him sit in his own discomfort. Then she leaned in, not out of kindness, not out of forgiveness, but because she wanted to make sure he never forgot this moment. "You don't get to erase what happened," she said, her voice calm, sharp, and unforgiving. Whitmore nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing. He opened his mouth again, but whatever excuse he had been about to say, he thought better of it. "Smart man." The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to the medical emergencies on board, we have been given priority landing. Please prepare for arrival." The plane tilted slightly as it began its descent. Olivia straightened in her seat. Outside the window, the city lights glittered like shattered glass against the dark sky. She felt eyes on her, passengers sneaking glances, pretending not to. But she didn't care, because after today, no one on this flight would ever forget her. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane began its descent. A robotic voice echoed overhead, instructing passengers to fasten their seat belts and prepare for landing. Dr. Olivia Carter sat rigid in seat 3A, her fingers interlocked, her pulse steady. Outside the window, the city sprawled beneath them, glowing against the darkness. But inside the plane, a different kind of tension hung in the air. She could feel it, the weight of what had just happened, the shame, the guilt, the unspoken apologies sitting like heavy luggage in the first-class cabin. No one spoke. No one dared to. And then a shift. A flight attendant, a different one. Not Lauren, approached her seat. A middle-aged woman with auburn hair and tired eyes. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, "the captain would like to thank you personally once we land. Airport medical staff will be meeting us at the gate." Olivia nodded. "Understood." The flight attendant hesitated. "And I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how you were treated." Olivia turned to look at her. The woman wasn't Lauren, the one who had humiliated her. She wasn't even one of the passengers who had mocked her. But still she felt the need to apologize. Because she knew. They all knew. Olivia took a slow breath. "It's not me you should be apologizing to." The flight attendant blinked, confused. Olivia glanced toward Charles Whitmore, the man who had blocked her path, the man who had almost let a child die because of his prejudices. He had barely moved since their last conversation. His fingers fidgeted against his armrest, his jaw tight. His eyes were locked on the seatbelt sign, avoiding her. He was ashamed. Good. Olivia turned back to the flight attendant. "Your apology should go to the next person who faces this. Because there would be another. There was always another. The flight attendant swallowed, gave a small nod, and stepped away. As the plane touched down with a soft jolt, the cabin remained eerily silent. No excited chatter. No casual stretching or checking of phones. Just an entire section of first-class passengers sitting stiffly, aware that they had witnessed something bigger than a flight delay or an in-flight inconvenience. They had seen themselves, and they hadn't liked what they saw. The doors opened. A rush of cool airport air flooded the cabin as passengers in economy applauded. It took Olivia a second to realize they were clapping for her. She turned, surprised, and saw the mother from earlier, the one whose child she had saved, standing near the exit, her baby cradled in her arms. Tears streaked down the woman's face. "Thank you," she mouthed, her voice raw with emotion. Olivia felt that, deeper than anything, because this was why she did what she did. Not for the approval of men like Charles Whitmore, not for the validation of those who doubted her, but for the people who actually mattered. She gave the mother a small nod, then gathered her things. She didn't rush. She didn't need to, because this time no one was standing in her way. The first-class passengers remained seated as Dr. Olivia Carter stood, adjusting the strap of her bag. It was an unspoken rule of air travel that first-class passengers exited first. But not today. Today, they stayed seated, silently watching her go. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. She walked slowly, deliberately, past the very people who had tried to remove her, who had doubted her, who had blocked her. And as she did, no one met her eyes. Except for him. Charles Whitmore. His fingers still gripped the armrests, his suit crisp, but his confidence unraveling. He opened his mouth as if to speak, as if to explain. Olivia didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't give him the chance. Some things weren't worth entertaining. Some things didn't deserve closure. She passed him without a glance. Let him sit with it. As she stepped into the jet bridge, the cool, recycled airport air hit her like a wave. The sterile hum of the terminal buzzed in the distance. A small group stood near the gate, airport medical staff waiting for the elderly man she had saved. And just beyond them, the mother from economy class. The woman cradled her baby, rocking him gently, her eyes scanning the exiting passengers. The moment she spotted Olivia, relief flooded her face. "Dr. Carter," she called, stepping forward. Olivia barely had time to react before the woman wrapped her in a hug. A real one. A grateful one. A human one. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my son's life." Olivia exhaled, allowing herself a moment of stillness. "I'm just glad he's okay." The mother pulled back, her eyes glassy with emotion. "I want people to know what happened. The way they treated you in there was wrong." Before Olivia could respond, the woman lifted her phone. "I recorded everything." The video was already spreading. Before Olivia had even set foot in baggage claim, the internet was already buzzing. A doctor denied her seat in first class until the passengers who mocked her needed her the most. A clip of Whitmore blocking her path went viral within minutes. A clip of her pushing past him to save a child followed. A clip of her reviving the elderly man while the same people who doubted her watched in silence. Comments flooded in. "This is why we need more representation in medicine." "Imagine letting a kid die because of your racism." She didn't just earn her seat, she earned everyone's respect. And then a new hashtag began trending. Let her see. As Olivia walked through the terminal, her phone vibrated. A message from her assistant. "Call me when you land." "You won't believe who just reached out." Olivia frowned, but before she could respond, a familiar voice called out behind her, "Dr. Carter." She turned. Charles Whitmore stood there, his posture stiff, his face unreadable. The last time he had stood in front of her, he had been blocking her path. Now he looked like a man who had been humbled. "I need to talk to you," he said. Olivia crossed her arms. "Why?" He swallowed. because I think I just made the biggest mistake of my career." Dr. Olivia Carter didn't move. Charles Whitmore stood in front of her, looking profoundly uncomfortable. The once confident businessman, the man who had dismissed her, doubted her, physically blocked her from saving a life, now stood in the middle of a busy airport terminal asking for her time. She let the silence stretch. Let him sit in it. Let him feel it. Finally, she spoke. "You need to talk to me?" she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Now you do." Whitmore exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. His posture was stiff, a man unaccustomed to being on the losing side of a conversation. He hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "I run a hospital network. Whitmore Medical Centers. Maybe you've heard of us." Olivia folded her arms. "I have." It was one of the largest hospital systems on the East Coast. Private, exclusive, and from what she knew, not exactly known for diversity in leadership. Whitmore nodded, shifting uncomfortably. "I just spoke with my board." And he exhaled sharply, as if forcing himself to say the next words. "They want you on staff." Olivia blinked. Of all the things she had expected, this wasn't one of them. "You want me to work for you," she said slowly. Whitmore cleared his throat. "More than that. We're creating a new division, increasing accessibility, pushing for stronger leadership in underrepresented communities. And we want," he hesitated, "we need someone like you to run it." Olivia let out a soft laugh. Not out of amusement, out of disbelief. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice even. 2 hours ago, I wasn't even worthy of sitting next to you. Now, you want me to lead one of your hospitals?" Whitmore's jaw tightened. He had no excuse. Because she was right. He ran a hand down his face, exhaling through his nose. "I was wrong." His voice was quieter this time, forced but genuine. "And I see that now." For the first time, Olivia really looked at him. This wasn't just damage control. Not entirely. Something had changed in him. The man who had blocked her wasn't the same man standing in front of her now. And that wasn't her victory. That was his failure. She tilted her head. "Tell me something, Mr. Whitmore. If none of this had happened, if I had just quietly left first class when you wanted me to would I be standing here right now?" He didn't answer immediately, because they both knew the truth. No. If she had backed down, if she had allowed herself to be humiliated, he never would have thought twice about her. She wouldn't be standing here, listening to his desperate attempt at redemption. Whitmore swallowed. "Dr. Carter, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'd like to earn your respect." Olivia studied him, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Humility, regret, and the smallest trace of hope. She glanced down at her phone, the screen still lighting up with notifications. The world was already talking about what happened on that flight. She didn't need his job offer, but maybe just maybe she could use it for something bigger, something that really mattered. She met his gaze. "I'll think about it." Whitmore exhaled, nodding. He knew better than to push. As he turned to walk away, Olivia called after him. "Mr. Whitmore." He stopped. She tilted her head, considering. "Next time you see a black woman in first class." A pause. "Did he see?" Whitmore nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." And with that he disappeared into the crowd. Dr. Olivia Carter stood in the middle of the bustling airport terminal, watching Charles Whitmore disappear into the crowd. His words still lingered. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'd like to earn your respect." She had spent years in medicine, years proving herself, fighting for recognition in rooms where she had more experience than the men trying to undermine her. And now the man who had publicly humiliated her was offering her power. Olivia's phone vibrated again. Another notification. Another wave of messages, articles, and posts about what had happened on Flight 1627. Let Her Sit was trending worldwide. People were outraged, furious, demanding accountability. The airline had already issued a public apology, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But Olivia knew the truth. This was no misunderstanding. This was a pattern. And for once, the world wasn't looking away. A new call notification flashed across her screen. Maya Thompson, her best friend, her mentor, a civil rights attorney who had spent her career tearing apart systems designed to exclude people like them. Olivia sighed and answered. "I was waiting for your call," Maya said, skipping past pleasantries. "Are you seeing this?" "I'm seeing it. They want you on every major network by tomorrow morning." MSNBC. Even the Today Show. Olivia rubbed her temple. "Maya, they want your story, Liv. The whole world does. This is bigger than just you." Olivia knew that. She felt that. But something inside her resisted the idea of sitting in a studio, repeating the same story over and over while corporations and politicians pretended to care. "I'm not a symbol," Olivia said finally. "No," Maya agreed. "Your force." Olivia exhaled, shifting her weight. "Whitmore offered me a job." Silence. Then Maya's sharp laugh. "You're joking. He wants me to lead a new division focused on increasing accessibility in medicine." "Of course he does." Maya's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Nothing like a little public embarrassment to inspire diversity initiatives." Olivia closed her eyes. "I told him I'd think about it." Another pause. And Olivia stared at the ceiling, then back at the chaos of the airport. People whispering, sneaking glances at her. And that's when it hit her. She didn't need a network interview. She didn't need to go on TV to tell people what happened. She needed to do something with it. Slowly, a plan began forming in her mind. "I have an idea," Olivia said. Maya hesitated. Then a smile in her voice. "I was hoping you'd say that." By the time Olivia reached baggage claim, she had already drafted a response to Whitmore. Not an acceptance. Not a rejection. A negotiation. If she was going to take this job, it wasn't going to be some corporate PR stunt. She would take the position only under one condition: she would have complete control. She would build real initiatives, real policy changes, not just a public-facing department designed to fix Whitmore's reputation. And if he thought otherwise, he could find someone else to clean up his mess. Olivia pressed send. She had been forced to fight for her seat on that plane. Now she was claiming an entire table. Dr. Olivia Carter leaned back in the airport lounge chair, sipping a glass of water as she watched her phone screen. Message sent. Now she waited. Her fingers hovered over her screen, scrolling through the whirlwind of reactions from Flight 1627. The world had turned the incident into a movement. People were calling out the airline, demanding action, exposing similar stories of discrimination. And then a reply. "Charles Whitmore. Let's meet. My office. Tomorrow morning." No argument. No negotiation. Just acceptance. She smirked. Good. The next morning, Whitmore Medical Center's HQ. Olivia stepped into the towering glass building in downtown Manhattan, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had been in spaces like this before: corporate hospitals built like financial empires. Places that treated healthcare like a business instead of a right. A receptionist greeted her nervously. "Dr. Carter, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." Olivia nodded and followed. She was led to a massive corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A sleek, minimalist desk. And behind it, Charles Whitmore. He stood as she entered, his posture tense but controlled. "Dr. Carter," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. Olivia didn't sit. "Not yet. I read your terms," he said, cutting to the chase. "You want complete control over the new division. A full budget. Hiring power. No interference from the board." "Yes." Olivia met his gaze without flinching. Whitmore exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "You're asking for a lot." "I'm asking for exactly what's needed." He studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right. Olivia blinked. She had expected pushback, negotiation, a fight. Instead, agreement. She folded her arms. Just like that. Whitmore's jaw tensed. I saw the numbers this morning. The backlash. Investors are worried. My board is panicking. He sighed. This isn't just about optics, Dr. Carter. It's about survival. She tilted her head. Your survival? His lips pressed into a thin line. I won't pretend I'm doing this out of pure altruism. But that doesn't mean I don't see the value in it. Olivia considered him. For the first time, he wasn't acting like the powerful CEO. He was acting like a man trying to fix something he had broken. That didn't mean she trusted him. But maybe, just maybe, this was a door worth walking through. She finally lowered herself into the chair across from him. Then, let's get to work. Whitmore nodded, reaching for a folder. You'll have everything in writing by the end of the day. Welcome to Whitmore Medical Centers, Dr. Carter. She accepted the paperwork, but she knew the truth. This wasn't his welcome. This was her takeover. Dr. Olivia Carter stepped out of Whitmore Medical Centers and into the crisp New York air. A deal had been made. A power shift had begun. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt something deeper. Resolve. The past 48 hours had changed everything, not just for her, but for the world watching. People weren't just talking about what happened on Flight 1627. They were demanding change. And Olivia? She had just secured a position where she could make it happen. Not a diversity hire. Not a PR stunt. She had negotiated full control over the new medical equity division, real funding, real influence, real authority. No one would ever have to fight for their seat in her hospitals. Her phone buzzed. Maya. She answered on the first ring. Well? Maya's voice was sharp with anticipation. It's done, Olivia said simply. A beat of silence. Then a slow exhale from Maya. I hope he knows what he just unleashed, she muttered. Olivia smirked. He's about to find out. 6 months later, the boardroom at Whitmore Medical Centers was filled with executives, doctors, and hospital administrators. At the head of the table, Dr. Olivia Carter. She scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces, some eager, some wary, some still underestimating her. She had spent the last 6 months rebuilding, hiring diverse leadership, eliminating barriers for underprivileged medical students, expanding outreach programs in neglected communities, changing the system from the inside, not just reforming Whitmore Medical Centers, revolutionizing it. Whitmore himself sat across from her, listening intently as she outlined her latest initiative. The man who had once blocked her path was now one of her strongest allies. Because he had learned something crucial, she wasn't here to ask for a seat. She was here to lead the entire table. 1 year later, Flight 1627 revisited. The airport terminal was crowded as Olivia made her way toward her gate. First-class ticket in hand. This time, as she boarded, there were no skeptical stares. No whispered doubts. As she took her seat, a flight attendant approached. Dr. Carter, the woman said, there's a mother in economy with a sick child. Would you be willing to? Olivia was already standing. Take me to them. She walked down the aisle, not forward, but back. Because leadership wasn't about where you sat. It was about who you stood up for. And she would always stand. What happened on Flight 1627 wasn't just about one woman's fight for respect. It was about all of us. How many times have people been judged before they even had the chance to prove themselves? How many opportunities have been denied, doors closed, voices silenced just because of assumptions? Dr. Olivia Carter didn't just claim her seat. She claimed her power. And now it's your turn. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, eye-opening stories that challenge the way we see the world. Like the video if you believe in standing up for what's right. Comment below. What would you have done in Olivia's position? Because in the fight for respect, every voice matters. Make sure yours is heard. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's change the conversation together.